So later.
They need to step it up.
Oh, how you doing? You guys doing any Oktoberfest this week?
Now, we're going to understand it. Well, just 50. It's like, wait, I was waiting. Was it?
It was.
No issues, no.
Nothing. It was. Better.
So what he playing? Oh, that's.
They got routed last week.
Oh, really? By who?
My daughter didn't know. They. I asked her.
Is North Central still the
They're
stuff?
still the, like, they're like.
don't have.
They had all the homecoming events because of who they're playing.
What are you talking?
That's funny.
You know what your understanding college is found?
I thought it was like, you know,
I used to
Regular.
love their games.
Yeah, it actually didn't get good until 1989.
there you go.
You mean when Leroy wasn't there?
Leroy was not there.
No.
But they had two national champions in that short spell, and they.
They lost the week. They played Miller. They played Miller.
Archie, what do you want to be? Pickle out you go.
You never know.
Joe. So they got killed by 50-7.
Sounds like an IU game.
Oh, play Miller King, and then they go to North Central. Oh, I'm sorry, no, North Park. North Central is October 25th
At North Central.
in Naperville. Want to go?
I know. I go, but you win the lottery and you're like.
What kind of missing life did you have?
No.
Right here.
That's what happens when you give your life.
Watch me do.
Agenda for today's meeting.
So now we're here. Yeah. Varsity. Six. You played Al Morris for Michigan. I'd say, Al Morris. And very large. He was so.
Was yesterday morning? I wasn't this morning.
Wendy, I have 3 o'clock.
It's 3 o'clock.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming to today's meeting. Today's meeting is going to be about cut-up houses only. Audience, there is no audience participation whatsoever. You can just sit and listen. And with that, how would like to start?
I've got a PowerPoint.
Mhm.
We could start with that. I've also invited some experts to testify today. Herm Hoagie is a local realtor. I think he can provide some helpful information. So Wendy, can you pull up the PowerPoint, please?
I can't.
That's a meeting. We got 2 lawyers today.
Wendy, how do you want to do it? You can say next slide.
Or wave your hand or something like that, and I go click it unless you want the controls.
Whatever.
That's why it's there. You don't have to get weird gesture.
Okay, cut up rentals. This is something, George, you may recall, we were on WJOB in 23. And this is a topic that came up during our interview with Jim Debo. So I've got a video. I've got Herm Hoagie who can provide experience with how this impacts the community. We can talk a little bit about what Hammond has done. There are solutions. This is going to be something that's going to involve a lot of the town staff and the council decides that this is a problem that we can address. And then I can offer some takeaways myself. So what is a cut-up rental? Typically a single-family home that's split into multiple units. We have some examples in Hammond that the video will discuss, and we have evidence that these things are happening in Munster. I know that there are some potential and pending investigations that we are considering. And then there's potentially some legal challenges for us. So here's, let's start this. Located in Hammond. Last year, cut-up rentals that landed in Munster. Cut-up rental. So a cut-up rental is a single-family home where the owner decided to put up drywall partitions and other dividers and turn it into a multi-family residential property. In this particular instance, 6609 Jefferson has been turned into a 5-unit apartment building. And what's the problem with that? Well, this is a single-family residential neighborhood. This building was never built to be 5 units. We haven't found out about this. Through administrative and legal action, they forced the owner to turn the property back to single family use. That's why I'm here today, because cut rentals like this are landing in Munster today. During the 2023 municipal campaign, George Shinkin and I appeared on WJOB, and the topic was cut up rentals. The agent of the Munster housing stock, in some respects, parallels what has been happening to Hammond 20 years ago. Our housing stock is about 20 years newer than the Hammond housing stock, and we've been paying very close attention to what guys in Hammond have been doing about rental properties and other things like that in the older sections of town. Our older sections of town are starting to mimic some of the things that Hammond was wrestling with in the late 90s, early 2000s. We're paying very close attention to what Hammond did. And I think, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due, I think Barry McDermott and the Democrats here in Hammond did a good job with controlling some of that Wild West atmosphere that exists in central Hampton. Why did we put up rental properties? Well, the Indiana Supreme Court has determined only to occupy the project that the Senate can approve it up to because they vote during improvements and reap the fruits of their labor by selling homes. In a written situation, this incentive has provided ownership of occupants for which to some incentive to improve the property because he or she would only benefit from the current building, not for the parts of Munster are beginning to experience these types of properties, this is something that we need to focus on right now.
So, with that, that's the background. I'd like to introduce Herm Hoagie. He is a broker owner of the Remax office at corner 45th and White Oak. He's got 50 years of experience.
That's about right. Unfortunately, that's true.
And Herm can offer a perspective as a real estate professional, what cut-up rentals can do in the community.
Thanks for giving me a couple of minutes here. First of all, I want to mention, Jonathan mentioned I've been in real estate about 50 years, along with my wife, Chris. Our specialization is residential, although we do dabble in other commercial and so forth. Been a resident in Munster for 43 years. Grew up in Hammond, ironically, and my first office was in Hammond near the old Woodmar Shopping Center. And I can tell you from all my years of experience that when someone's neighbor cuts up their house into taking a 4-bedroom home and making it a 6-bedroom rental unit and renting out the bedrooms, the neighborhood comes unglued. It's reasonable for the public to expect the zoning laws to be enforced. And if they're not enforced, they have a public hearing to change them. We see the signs all over when there's a public hearing. We just went through Centennial Village for many years to get to where we're at. And it took a lot of approvals and everything. Picture yourself, I assume most of you live in a single family home, and that zoning itself, single family home, is pretty clear. You can't really get around that. It's single family. If I took my 2-story down the block here on Tapper that my kids grew up in, and now we're empty nesters, I could cut it up into easily a 6-bedroom home and rent it. But my neighbors would not be happy. The reason they would not be happy is the market value crashes. People do not want to live in an area where the properties in the immediate neighborhood are in zoning violation. They expect the zoning laws to be enforced. And I don't want to get on a horse about the national laws or anything else, but I really look at America, I look at Indiana, I look at Munster, I look at Hammond. The laws are in place. All we have to do is enforce them. That's all we have to do. And I've been through zoning variances in my career for specific properties in different communities. I've seen some variances granted and others where the planning commission or the town board says, no, we're not going to do that. We don't think it's in the best interest of the immediate community. So what I can tell you is, again, I say market value diminishes. It's because that's what buyers say to me. Today, I'm sure you've heard about the real estate industry's changed a little bit the last couple of years, where buyer agency is now a very, very serious thing. And if any one of you were working with one of my great realtors or my wife or I, the first thing you want to know is the neighborhood sound? Show me comparable sales in the immediate neighborhood that support the value that the seller is asking, so they can determine how much to offer on the house. And I guarantee you, if there's chopped up housing in the immediate neighborhood, if there are comparable sales, they're going to be deflated in value because buyers do not want that. They want to be, if it's zoned single family, they want it to be zoned single family. There's buffer zones of duplexes and 4 units and apartment buildings, all of those things in your master plan. And I know we spend a lot of time and taxpayer dollars on master plans. So that's really all I have to say. I'm glad to answer any questions. I'm here more as a resident of Munster today that happens to have near 50 years of experience in real estate. By the way, the 50 years, I'm not retired. Okay, I just left the office. My wife is there. We work every day. We're active in the market. So I'm not talking from the past. I'll reference my days in Hammond with a Hammond office, and we still do a ton of business in Hammond. Mayor McDermott had a big challenge because in my early years, there was a lot of chopped up housing in Hammond. There were basements with apartments in them that you couldn't walk upright if you were above 4.5 feet high. They were health hazards. They were fire traps. They were they were bad problems. Besides the neighbors saying, boy, I wish my neighbor didn't have 9 cars in their front yard today. So again, from a resident standpoint and a professional standpoint, zoning ordinances are created by the master plan. And I think it's reasonable for the municipality to be expected to enforce those zoning laws or change them through the public hearing process.
Thank you.
Thanks, Herm. So Herm has touched on one of the aspects of this. So if this is something that the town council finds that deserves further study or investigation, how we can address, there's some various ways that we can do that. And as I've shared, as all of you know, my practice is both real estate and business law. And one of the ways that I have observed municipalities address this is through the code enforcement. The current Indiana rule is 675 IAC 14, which is the Indiana Residential Code, and it incorporates by reference the 1 and 2 family dwelling code, which is a uniform code. Chuck, tell me if I'm getting off in the left field here, but it incorporates that by reference. It's the 2018 version. And in my observation, in communities that have been seeking to control this, that's one of the first things that happens. Is you have a property like this, the communities will send in inspectors, and like Herm said, that's one of the things they look at. Are the ceiling heights appropriate? Do we have proper fire exits, and other things? And this is one of the mechanisms that I've seen Hammond use effectively, is they go in and they do that. Another area is zoning enforcement. And one of the things that I've seen Hammond do is permits may only be issued after review of current zoning for compliance. And here are some of the areas where zoning can be a part of the regulatory scheme. We look at unauthorized land use, whether the land is not being used properly. We can look at building code violations. We can look at nuisance violations. We can look at parking violations. Now, candidly, one of the things that has made addressing cut-ups more challenging is in 2018, the state passed a short-term rental statute that gave that put limitations on what municipalities can do in terms of regulating dwelling units in owner-occupied properties. But it's very clear that municipalities can continue to regulate the public health, safety, nuisance prevention, and welfare. We have here someone that has some experience, and Kim, I hope I'm not embarrassing you. You come to us from Hammond, and you used to help with some of the enforcement activities.
Yes, we used to do illegal cut-ups. Yeah.
And in fact, I ran into a former Hammond councilwoman, I'm sure you know her, Kim Poland.
Yeah.
And Kim explained to me that some of the things that they used to do was they would do neighborhood sweeps and other things to identify properties that have been illegally cut up and being illegally treated as multifamily properties. So I've been getting calls from residents that we have these cut-ups. I'm sure others have. And I think this is something that we as a council might want to consider looking into and considering how to address. So I offer that to the council to open a conversation.
What are your solutions? I mean, you gave us the education. Thank you very much. Being a real estate attorney, what are your solutions?
Oh, okay. I think the first solution is this something that council wants to address?
Yeah, we've been addressing this for quite some time, but what are your solutions? You are the expert in this,
Well,
and we're listening to you.
Well,
Seriously.
okay, so what, you said we've been addressing it. I'm not familiar with the exact process that we've been using to address it, so maybe you
Sergio,
can share
could
that.
you please address that issue that you and Nicole have been working on?
With regards to cut-up homes?
Yeah.
First of all, does Munster have cut-off homes?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. So we have no cut-off homes in
Do we-
Munster.
Not that I'm aware of, unless someone's aware of one that actually fits the criteria of multiple units,
Okay,
as defined by our code as what a multiple unit is, which is a unit that can be self-sustained within itself.
Mhm.
Personal bathrooms,
Mhm.
showers, kitchen, bedroom, not that I'm aware of.
but we have short-term rentals,
We do have short.
which is a totally different that we're talking about right now.
Correct.
So what, aren't you working on the new codes
We are.
right now with, Ms. Bennett? What are you guys working on? There's one about, we're gonna use Carmel's code about 10%. Rentals,
I'm not sure that we're at that point of.
Okay.
That require additional legal review, I'm not sure.
yeah, because
Yeah, in fact, I
We
think
could
that
get
just
sued.
crossed my desk this afternoon, so.
Mr. Westland, you've worked with Hammond for how many years? You know all about this, could you please
Well,
explain how Hammond's taking care of it, and if there's anything we can do code wise?
so you brought up short-term rentals, those are different. So we gotta talk about, like, we gotta compare apples to apples, right? Like, we gotta all make sure we're using the right language, right? Like, so cut-up homes in Hammond that were the problem were what Herm was talking about, where, like, the 6609 Jefferson, or 6609 Jefferson. So that was a property that had 5 separate entrances and separate apartments. in it. Okay, and they went in and they said, listen, this thing, the occupancy was a single family residence. You now have violated health and safety rules. So Hammond brought them to the Board of Works and said, listen, this is an unsafe building because your occupancy is for a single family resident. And now you have 5 different tenants. And it had apartment A, apartment B, apartment C, like it was an apartment building is what they turned it into.
Self-sustained.
Correct. Without, getting the proper compliance, without complying with building code. And so Hammond, under their Board of Works, similarly, our unsafe building commission would say, restore it to a single family residence. And the guy sued. Okay, and it matriculated its way all the way through the courts. He also sued in federal court, right? The landowner. And they spent, high 6 figures, almost 7 figures to get that house restored. All right, in one lawsuit. So I'm not saying it's not like that they shouldn't have done it, but that was a priority. And because of what Herm said, it was a priority for that administration, right? And that wasn't the only home, but that was kind of the test case, and it just got resolved. I mean, the final appellate court case was like, a couple of years ago. So this went on from 13, it went on 6 or 7 years of litigation through the appellate courts, the Board of Works, the trial court, and then the appellate courts, and then the federal companion that went with it. So, the question that you asked Sergio is do we have homes like that? I don't think we do at current, right? If we did, we would use a similar, process through our unsafe building board, right, to go through that. The separate question you asked, though, is about short-term rentals, and Jonathan's right. There was and here's the other thing that makes this kind of hard to compare to Hammond. So through inspections, right, a law was passed by the state in 1984. Or it wasn't passed in 84, but it said if you had an inspections ordinance that was prior to 1984, right, for rental inspections, you could, then that was grandfathered in, essentially, and what you can do now is different than what you could do then. Hammond's ordinance was 1961 when it was passed. They've never revised it. So they have a separate inspection protocol than what we could implement today. Additionally, like with the Airbnbs, that Jonathan's right, that statute went into effect and it said, listen, if you have a short-term rental ordinance prior to 2017, 20 December 31st, 2017. Then that's grandfathered in.
Mhm.
Hammond's got that. Their ordinance was passed in 1973. Ours was passed, our zoning ordinance, right, was 2019, which is what we're talking about. So we've got to comply with the state rules on not regulating Airbnb. So it's difficult to make a comparison with Hammond and what Hammond does and what Munster can do today, because they are working off of grandfathered in ordinance. Now, that's not to say we can't do anything, but I don't know that it's fair to make that comparison. And, you know, I think the building code is one avenue that we have, right? I think that's correct. I think zoning ordinance is one avenue that we have. Owner occupied Airbnbs are tough. They are, you know, that state law makes it difficult. Non-owner occupied, you can regulate a little bit more. And I think that's part of what Sergio and Nicole are working on. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but
So it seems like we had, and I know the house we're talking about is a couple blocks away.
I would
Yeah.
prefer not to speak about a specific home that you could wind up, right, like
Yeah, I agree.
in some sort of
Let's
litigation.
not mention a specific-
Exactly, but
So just take a hypothetical.
a hypothetical that I could take my house and I could rent out, while I'm living there, I could rent 2 rooms, correct? That's the max I could rent.
So under the building code, you can have 2 tenants and tenants are defined, right? And right, that you could rent to. And if you're gonna own or occupy it, you would not have to go to the standard of a commercial building.
So how do we change something like that? Or can we not?
Well, you can't touch the building code, right? Like that's so you're not gonna touch that.
That's Indiana building code.
That's
Okay.
what's been adopted, right?
Okay.
And that we follow. In terms of zoning, right? Owner occupied is tough. Non-owner occupied, you could do some stuff.
Mhm.
So, and that's what they're going through now. Right? And I think our current base code, I think is, more lax. But let's say we get one that's in violation, right? Let's do the hypothetical where they've got a bunch of, it's non-owner occupied and they've got a bunch of folks. It's still a matter of proof, right? Like you've got to prove your case. And that's going to require, you know, some resources. And then if they sue, you know, how aggressive do you want to be? I don't think anyone wants to spend the kind of money that
6 figures? No.
high 6 figure.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, it was close to 7.
Yeah.
So, you know,
So how do we as a town, without spending money, I mean, some of these people not knowing if it's owner occupied, we would have to hire a private detective, correct?
well, your hypothetical, how do I know, you know, how many tenants are there, right? Like, and a family is a tenant. So theoretically, and go try to define family. Give me the definition. I don't know what it is, right? There are 3 last names at our house. That's a family still though, right?
Yeah.
There's 6 of us and then with 3 last names.
So they could rent to their siblings and they'd be okay,
You're gonna have a hard time
okay?
arguing
Trying
what a
to see.
family. Right, and then you get into, and, you know, it's,
Yes, it's the answer. So they can rent and it's.
you can run down, and I know, you know, Sergio, Nicole and Chuck have run these things out and trying to draft the new code. Because let's take a house, right? Where the basement is finished.
Mhm.
And you put a bar down there with the kitchen. Full bathroom, right, and. I have my mother-in-law stay there, right, like, and then there's a separate entrance. Did I turn that into a 2-unit if it's my mother-in-law staying there? What if she dies? Oh, fine. What if she dies and I say, you know, shit, I got this thing down in the basement. I wanna rent it.
I know
Right,
some homes like that.
right, I mean, and the bigger the home. Right,
The less noticeable.
the less noticeable and the more apt it could happen, right? Because you got folks with disposable income that, you know, maybe had kids at the time and whose kids have now gone away to college and have started their lives, so, you know. I mean, at the end of the day, how big of a problem is it? How big of a priority is it for the policy makers, right? And then, you know, what precedent do you want to try to set? And we can help advise where we need to go, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of the stuff we need to hear from you guys.
But you're working with Sergio on that, or Sergio
There are gonna be-
is our,
Suggestions, right? And then those are gonna be areas of needed input, I guess I would say, right?
We have a lot of this that we have been discussing at length. And kind of dissecting what can be done with the zoning code versus what is enforcement of the building code. Which gets complicated and wrapping your brain around because it's entirely different provisions and how they're imposed. But not only in the investigation process, but also in the drafting of the zoning code that has been an ongoing consideration with this. And what's happening, as I've expressed several times in our drafting, is that it's not just tunnel or funnel into one area. It's, for example, we're talking about the different rentals, right? So not only are we, the proposed uses in the zoning code obviously have to comply with state law. So just to take an example, you cannot prohibit by state law owner occupied short-term rentals, so rental less than 30 days. Cannot prohibit it specifically in the statute. So, but you can set up provisions when it's not owner occupied. And those could be, you know, approval through special exception, variance, etc. And you can put some restrictions on those, but those are very different than what can be done with an owner. So those are the things that or when it's owner occupied. So those are the things that we're vetting and we're talking about. That rolls into, right, what you can do with registration of those houses. Then that turns into discussions that we've had about renting entire houses. The reference earlier to the zoning ordinance in Carmel, Greenwood, and Fishers earlier this year had passed ordinances. We've discussed those over the last, it's been a recent discussion more in the last probably 10 days or 2 weeks because of the way that those are proposed in other ordinances and by limiting how many rentals can occur within a subdivision. So then it's looking at how those subdivisions have been set up, and we spent time last week considerably going through that. So in trying to incorporate what, if any of that can come into the zoning code, but then potentially amending the rental registration business section of the code in chapter 10, as you know, to that issue. So it's all these different feelers, right, that's going out that then turns into these other discussions trying to, you know, hit this from all angles.
So Georgia, you had asked,
Definitely something we're working on.
you had asked me about the Carmel ordinance specifically.
yeah, we could get sued.
Well, so there's all kinds, if you Google it, right, you'll
Yeah.
see all kinds of articles about it, and that 10% limitation in the subdivision. Right, and it's kind of a first come, first serve, so take Hill and Vale for a second, there are 80 homes in Hill and Vale. 10% is 8, I'm not real good at math, but I can do that one, right? So there are 8 homes that could be rentals.
Yeah.
And it's first come, first serve. Well, when the 9th guy comes in and we say no, what's gonna happen? I don't know the answer to that, right? Like, we're gonna say, well, we hit our limit. Carmel's gonna get faced with it. Now, their attorney gave an opinion that it was legal. Okay, his opinion is just as good as Jonathan's or mine or Nicole's or whatever, right? Like he says it's legal. Until the judge rules, right? Like we don't know the answer to that. I can guarantee you this, it's gonna get tested because you're limiting the ability of somebody who owns a home to do what they want with their property. So somebody,
Occupied as single family use,
Yeah.
which is permitted, right?
Right.
in some
Somebody-
districts.
so somebody's gonna test it. And what they did is they passed it in the summer and gave people, you know, these months to get in line and get registered. Well, and it comes into effect on January 1.
I think they
So,
all are, I believe Fishers and Greenwood are as well, effective January 1. So
so when the first
Fair enough.
lawsuit flies, right, and, you know, that's not gonna be, you know, I mean, it's a facial challenge to the ordinance, right? So it's gonna be, there's not gonna be a lot of evidence taken and blah, 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 not like the situation on Jefferson and Hammond. But you're still probably looking at 50 grand. Right, to defend that thing. And we're happy to defend it, right? Like we will do the work and defend it to the hill, whatever you want, but that's where you guys gotta tell us, like, this is an investment that it's a priority for us to make that investment. You know, your zoning code that they've been working on, you guys have said that's a priority. The overall rewrite, because the character-based code, we all agreed was not the answer. So that's been a priority, right? Like, and as you prioritize things in your budget, right, like but you gotta tell us, right? Like, we can't tell you, we can only tell you, here are the potential pitfalls. We think we can win, we don't think we can win. And then, you know, it's kind of like, you know, you're the golfer, we're the caddy, right? Like, we tell you what shots you got at your disposal, and you're gonna hit the shot, and I'm gonna say good shot.
Hey, Dave, you described the top-down approach. Take the zoning, you put restrictions on and you try and enforce it that way. Hammond has also had a very interesting mechanism to enforce, which I'll characterize as the bottom up, where they go in from the code enforcement, building code enforcement. And they inspect a property and say, okay, improper ceiling heights, like the example Herman gave. Gotta have a certain ceiling height, gotta have a certain door width, you gotta have emergency exits and things like that. And if it's not there, they cite them. And then they impose an escalating regimen of fines on a daily basis. What's been your experience with that?
Hammond's inspection, though, ordinance is different than Munster's. And I don't know in this forum that we want to get into all of the thoughts that we have about Munster's inspection for rentals. Because our ordinance was passed after the kind of the line of demarcation. So I'm not the 08 ordinance, because it wasn't prior to 1984, there may be some things in there that we might be on shaky ground. But when you can inspect, right, in the beginning, right, like, then, yeah, you want to inspect it, right, like, for things like that, I mean, I think. But those are obvious, right, like the doors and ceilings.
Well, one of the points, property like that comes up. It gets on the radar. And my experience, because I've litigated these, Hammond will send people in. They'll knock on the door. Hey, talk to the tenant, will you let us in? If the tenant doesn't let them in, they can't just barge you. It's Fourth Amendment right to privacy. The times I've heard, maybe you can validate this, Hammond will go and get a civil warrant for an inspection based on probable cause to believe that there's a building code violation. They go in and perform those inspections, and they determine that there's been changes made, perhaps they've been made without proper permits. And we have these violations of the 1 and 2 family dwelling code. And so that's sort of the bottom up way of addressing this sort of stuff. Have you been involved in any of that?
No.
So that's, I'm familiar with that as a mechanism. And the process is similar to what you described. Hammond will cite the building, they'll mark it as an unsafe building, they'll cite the violations. You'll have an administrative hearing before the Board of Public Works. They'll issue an order, reduce it to judgment, they'll record the judgment, and then they proceed on that basis. That's another mechanism that's available to persuade people to maintain their properties in a safe and habitable way. And it can help address some of these things where people are trying to create living basement that maybe doesn't meet safety regulations and the 1 and 2 family building.
But you still have to analyze Hammond's right to inspect under their ordinances versus ours.
Sure, that'd be something that we'd have you.
We would have to do a fairly deep dive into that. Because their inspections ordinance has been in effect for 65 years. And it got grandfathered on there.
Fairfield, is anybody knowing here about us going in and?
We have that authority. If we're denied entry, then we can get a warrant to.
Okay, so we do have that.
Yes.
Well, that's
But
what.
you have to have a basis to be able to go in.
Exactly.
Have access.
Just like
Not-
Hammond.
Well, now Hammond, there's different provisions that Hammond has because of grandfathering that is not permitted in the current code that allows for it for a municipality. Obviously, if there's a belief probable cause for that, absolutely don't go ahead and deny it to the warrant, but there are different. Hammond can do more than what Munster can do.
But do we have situations where we have probable cause, like are there examples of that?
I have no idea.
I'm not familiar with any zoning classification where we have single family zone district and identified an illegal 2-unit dwelling or more unit dwelling in a single family zone classification. I'm not aware of any property within the town of Munster violating the zoning code to that effect.
But if we find out,
Versus a building code violation from
Oh.
structure, the roof's caving in.
Yeah, it's two different things. The
Two
code, the
different
building
issues,
code,
yeah,
yeah.
different.
it's,
Yep.
We've issued stop work order, when remodels are occurring and it does not meet building code. We have to correct those issues, but that's two different building versus an existing building, so.
Get up this. 20 years ago, I remember when the current mayor running. He made this a policy priority. Now, I think the environment in Munster is much different from the environment that he discovered in Central Illinois in the late 90s and early 2000s. I'm aware that there was a very robust very robust investor activity that was chopping up these houses, and they had these larger houses. But as a public policy concern, I think we heard it from her. When these things happen, and they're done in a way that typically is under the radar, it has an extremely negative impact on the environment. Negative impact on property values, it has a negative impact on the quality of the neighborhood. I'm getting outreach from residents saying, we think it's happening. I don't know. I think from the parenthetical information that's been provided to me, it appears that it's happening. But I think this is worth some research. And I would say that that's the next step, is when we start getting these, this outreach from residents. We create some mechanism to track this. And we look into it, and we look into it on an investigative basis to confirm whether this has happened. The Munster housing stock, at least on the north side of town, is age-wise in the same in the same category as those houses in central Hammond were at the end of the nineties and early 2000s. So if you look at the age of the housing stock, our north side housing stock is about what central Hammond was when the cut-up rental situation started to emerge in Hammond. So I think this is something that's worth investigating and looking into. And my suggestion is let's start logging this and developing a better understanding of this. It's happening. One of the things that I do believe is that when it happens, in some instances, it's happening under the radar. This is not something that the owner is coming in and asking for a building permit and then coming to surgeon and say, can I do it? We'll say no. I think in some instances, it's being done on the weekends and it's being done without pulling permits. And then I know in Hammond, that was one of the mechanisms that they used to deconvert properties, is that owners would go in and make these conversions. And then when it was discovered, Hammond would say, wait, you didn't pull any permits to do this. You can't do it. So I think we need to start this process by investigating, researching, and quantifying what's there. Because I think there's potentially a underground population of these properties that may exist, and we need to, in my opinion, we need to see if that exists, just like existed in Hammond 25 years ago.
How would you go about investigating that? You're talking about going to each house and doing an assessment of the possibility that the house is not in compliance either by zoning or, violation of the building codes?
Well, again, I talked to a former councilwoman, Kim Poland. She said that they did neighborhood surveys. Kim, can you offer some insight on what Hammond was doing back in the day?
So when we started doing that, we did drive up and down roads. We looked for multiple mailboxes. We looked for multiple meters.
That's for cut-ups.
Yeah, that was the one.
They do that already over here. I think a bigger problem that we have is these corporations coming and buying homes and renting them out. I think that's more of a problem going on in Munster right now than anything cut-up homes. That's
If
what's
they're
happening.
legally being rented, there's nothing you could do with them.
Yeah, I'm just saying, and then they don't, like you're saying, they don't take care of their property, you cite them and you don't hear a word. And we can't get any type of
Here's
communication.
another thing. I know that Herman Kittle case put a limit on how much you could charge for rental properties. But there's still the option of rental property licensing. And with the short-term rentals, there's the possibility of requiring permits to be issued for those. That could be another way that we could start tracking this.
And that's something we have drafted in the code.
And we revisit that, we implement it. I know at one time Munster had a rental registration ordinance. And I think when the Herman Kittle case came out, we stopped enforcing that.
No, it's on the books. That's why I
We
was
still have-
saying that we would have to, that we have a proposed amendment to that as part of it. The problem with the registrations are, for both the short-term rental and for the, what I'll call non-short-term rental, I guess anything over 30 days, it is only a registration, at the start of it, and a renewal or a new registration after a permit has been revoked. Otherwise, the permit continues. It is not a situation where it requires a renewal if it's only greater than 30 days. If it's a short-term rental statute allows for a renewal, but it's merely paper. You can't charge, you can't inspect.
So there's a house behind me and he's renting out to probably 7 different families. He only had to do it once, correct?
Correct.
Can we change the codes?
Well, if it's for a short-term rental, the only
These
thing
are
you
long-term.
can do, no, you can't. You can't change, well, let me rephrase that. Can you change it? Yes, from how it's drafted now slightly. But there are some other tweaks that we have proposed for it. But if it's a not short-term rental, so it's greater than 30 days. You are renting the house, I'm sorry, you are registering the house with the town as a rental. It's a $5 fee is all that state law allows.
And we can't go above that.
Came above it. And you cannot require an inspection unless there are additional complaints or issues that come up from there. But with that registration, then that house is registered. It doesn't mean it's being used for rental. But so long as that owner is registered, it can be rented
Mhm.
and it continues until the house is sold.
Yeah.
So it's not even to even look at how many houses in Munster are are registered,
Mhm.
doesn't mean they're active rentals.
Well, hang on, I'm gonna jump in and share. And I've looked at this code. You can, I believe with the rentals, as opposed to short-term rentals. You can have an annual registration. That's one of the enforcement mechanisms that can. Is you don't register, you can bring it up with the Board of Public Works. And you can get fines. And I think there's also a requirement to comply with zoning codes. So Jordan, you said you've got somebody that's renting to 7 different families?
Well, no, during his 10 years out, 7 families lived in that house. He only had to do 1 registration per Indiana law.
All right.
I
I
wanted to
saw
make-
Nicole shaking her head that we cannot do it, correct?
Looking right at the statute right now, again, this is one of the Hammond's grandfathered in. Hammond can do it because they were under the old code. The current code is that a subdivision will require a rental. This is the non-short term. To obtain a permit, that the one-time fee can be charged, and except when there is a change in ownership of the rental property, a permit does not expire. Political subdivision may require a new owner of the real estate to
I want to mention years ago, we had a higher fee for rentals. And we had an inspection fee. But when the state put in their new code, I don't know what it was, $50, $100, whatever it was more than $5. And I think we had an annual inspection with a fee. And that was all struck down.
because of that. And that was in 2014, I believe, June 30th, 2014 is when that all became effective, and it pulled back that authority to be, on top of those all the time, and to require homeowners to.
So basically, state law would need to change, so all the towns would need to get together, go down lobby and say, we need
That's
to
it.
change this because you're ruining the whole state.
That's where it
You guys
comes
work
from.
on that.
All have homes that they would do.
But one of the things that Herman Kittle case eliminated that exception for political subdivisions that had a registration and inspection program that existed until July 1st, 1984. So you can charge an annual rental fee.
No, it didn't eliminate them, those are excluded, the ones that have a inspection program or rental registration prior to 84 are exempt from the new statute that went into effect in 14. They do not have to follow those sections.
But I don't think ours was prior to 84.
It was 08.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're limited to $5 annual registration.
Not an annual, it's a one time.
One time.
I'm looking at it right now. Indiana Code 36-1-20-5. Political subdivision may impose upon an owner or landlord of a rental unit an annual registration fee of not more than $5. One of the things that Hammond does is you don't get your annual registration, they bang it. And it's pretty expensive bang. It's $500 or something for each unit. But more importantly, it creates an environment where there's oversight, and it helps develop this database for us to understand what's going on here with these types of properties. And I think that's the first step. Jordan, you say we don't have, I think, I'm not so confident.
We don't have what?
We don't have cut up rentals. I'm not so confident about it.
Well, then like we said, we gotta find out and let these individuals know so they can do their job. Nicole, was he correct on that?
I was just gonna say, I stayed corrected, John
Okay,
is
good.
correct in that. The difference is that it's the registration fee and updating what the statute allows in that registration ordinance. What they took out of that in 2014 was the ability to then do an inspection at that same time and charge for the inspection. So the annual of the $5 is for, if your example was the one house, then it's a one-time, or if it's a multifamily unit, then they can do for each one of the units for the duplex or a 4-unit or something like that, a legal one in that respect. So yeah, I stand corrected, Jonathan is right with that. The issue of what came in with the inspection program was that previously under the law, it allowed for inspection at the same time.
Okay.
And that's where you're not getting your foot in the door, unfortunately, to be able to look at the residents at that annual time, which is what what Hammond does. Hammond's point is that they require that as part of their registration.
So we could look and just take Hammond off right now. We can't even look at it because we don't compare to them.
I think there's a lot to learn from them
There's a lot
on some steps that they've taken when it applies.
Okay,
But it's got to be provided under state code or authorized under state code and not under their, state statute under their local words, because they were grandfathered in.
so I think moving forward, if we hear about cut-off houses, let the planning commission know, and then we have some ways to check out if they're doing it or not, correct?
Well, then it's letting the community development department know so that they can do it, and they are doing that. They're responsive to those. They're out there checking those out. That doesn't mean that they're, barging into people's homes, which obviously they can't do, but it's clearly, Chuck is out there, Glenn is out there. Nicole is looking at those and an indicator when they're driving by and checking those things. So it's, the mechanism's there, and we get questions all the time, and I'm working with them very closely on those, and okay, what can we do now, what can we do now, in consultation with the state, on many of these different things. So they're clearly on top of it, obviously having more provisions in the code, which are all part of what we're proposing, are going to give more mechanisms to be able to do that.
Oh, excuse me.
Thank you for your time. You
Thank you
guys
very
are
much.
just, let me know, I've got 3 bedrooms I could rent. Okay. No, this is a serious issue to the town of Munster, and I appreciate your due diligence. Thank you all. Thank you.
I'd like to add, did we eliminate the registration of rent?
We still have it.
We still have,
We enforce it.
On chapter 10 of under businesses.
and you maintain a list. And they come in, or you require them to come in annually.
Not annually, just initially.
You
You
can't
don't
go
do it
annually.
annual.
They just
We just
read
said,
that they can.
No, we don't do it
The
in our
code-
ordinance.
The current ordinance in chapter 10, that's one of the amendments to that. But that as it's written right now, it is a $5, and that's it, that's the whole issue of just who's registered doesn't mean it's being used as a rental. That's the current Munster code.
So you
Current
recommend
Munster
changing
code doesn't
it.
So we're changing it so we could go in there.
No,
That
can't
is you
go
can go
in.
in.
To register and
Yes.
with a very high late fee.
Right, if they miss a $5 payment, you can charge them $1,000.
You can charge them
That
500.
sounds good to me.
But I think
Sounds
we need to
reasonable.
put
That's what they do now.
If it's allowed, we should then get an annual fee.
And that's what we have like I said, even in dealing with the zoning, that like I said, it's breaking out into these other areas. And amending that, obviously, then that would be amending, Schedule A to add those fees and costs into that, to add those penalties into that, so that those, are accounted for in the code. Likewise, with your, short-term rental provision, there's nothing right now at all in the code relating to short-term rentals in the Munster code. And by state law, you can do that. That's $150 one-time registration.
And we're putting that in there. Okay, good.
have that as proposed as part of the permit for a short-term rental. That would be in the zoning code as part of those requirements.
I have a quick question. So let's say you do the annual fee of $5. And they have to submit paperwork about that rental that says like, oh, it's a 2-bedroom rental, because originally it might have been, but maybe they made it into a 4-bedroom rental. If something's wrong on that and it's an official document, is there a way to then be like, okay, you said it's 2-bedroom, we know that it's 4-bedroom, we have proof, we're going into the house now, and if there's something, you may change it or something at that point?
It's your whole house, if you will, registration. So you're not having to provide that information. On a short-term rental, you have to do that, where you can require that they have to identify how many units they're renting, or at least how many they're, available in that respect. But, for the, what I'll call the, non-short-term, in those situations, if it's not owner occupied, right, it's a whole house, so that it's just, they're not providing information and details of the home in that respect.
We can't make them provide it. Or, I don't know, I'm just asking. just
Yeah,
as
I
a-
mean, for those purposes, it's really irrelevant in the sense that if they're renting the house to a family in that respect, however, that's, those, the people in that regard are coming in for the long term.
Right, well, if it's a single family home rental, and you're renting to a single family, it's fine. I'm just saying if we're talking about the cut-ups and doing the other stuff, if we have somebody who's trying to rent to multiple people in one single family home that's been zoned as a single family.
Now you got a different issue.
So I've said, if he comes in and says, oh, no, I only have, this is for rented, but you're finding that it's more, and then you go, okay, well, you lied on this official document.
Well, you got clear action against that for, yes, that's allowed for in the code because it's, that would all go to, right, being able to close it down, if you get an injunction to, have them stop this
So-
activity. Yeah, it's not where it's just a one hit, we can fix it this way, but yes, that's definitely turns into the, evidence, in that case to have that stop.
Do we still have a code that says you can only have so many non-family members living in a house?
Can't do that.
So if I want to rent a single-family house and there's 6 people that are gonna live in there, but it's not gonna be divided up or cut up or nothing, then that's allowable.
There's
TV shows, right?
You have
I
bunk
would
beds?
refer that to Chuck, an occupancy limit on single-family homes, is that set anywhere by state code? I didn't think so.
So you can
I
have.
mean, it was.
There are
I'm
minimum.
pretty sure that the sizes. And then there is a occupancy, there is a square footage for each person for that.
So if number of people living there don't meet that square footage or minimum size requirement, then they're in violation.
Then we're into a safety issue.
Right,
Under the building code,
right,
not, so that's all then state,
right.
you
But
know.
I want to say after 2000 and before 2020 or whatever, we had a situation on State Line where there was a house where somebody was trying to have a number of dissimilar non-family members in a house, not a cut up. And we had a code that's at that time that said you could only have so many non-family members living in a house.
That was then.
Yeah, I think in 20, you and I talked about this a little bit. I mean, how do you craft a workable definition of a family in 2025?
Also, in that case, they would be running as a group. So it's a membership type thing.
Which becomes an issue then, or becomes one of the test questions, right, under the building code.
But again, they may not, anyway, we were able to stop that from happening.
The good old days.
Good old days.
Good old days. Right.
Well, why don't we do this? There are consensus that cut up rentals are single family homes that are altered to be multi-family apartment buildings. That's something that, does the council agree that that's a problem? That's something that we would be concerned about if we determined it was emerging. I think
It's a problem if it's happening in Munster. We don't see any evidence just of yet. Chief, you had something to say.
So I've been doing rental inspections for quite a long time. I just wanted made it very clear that we are doing ongoing investigations, especially for the fire site. We ask as part of our fire form, if this is a rental. And if they mark it as rental, we get their name, of course, they come back and check the database. Of course, all my people in town, they tell me when there's, they kind of know what's going on. Also, in the past, water billing is went through to make sure things match up. It doesn't. That was part of our thing. You were in on that. It was in on that when we started doing that. 7 years ago. That's an ongoing thing. I do want to mirror Ms. Bennett's comments that at one time, I was able to go in once a year and inspect. And then
They don't do that anymore.
and then it went to 3 years. And now it's once in a lifetime of the ownership, as is stated. These hands are tied. I wish I could. But I don't go after them. I talked to, I believe both of them. About trying to. But I just wanted the board to know that continuously, there is an ongoing investigation process. Yeah. I just wanted to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a problem. If I'd rather be proactive than reactive on this. Like I said, I think we have some bigger problems with corporations buying homes and renting them out. But yeah, I mean, right now, we all know the rules. State supersedes local zoning.
Right, but I think we need to have our zoning and our
And
regulations
that's what they're doing.
as strong
Yes.
as the state allows.
And that's what they're doing right now. We're working on that. It should be done soon. You know, and if this is happening, then shame on the people that aren't telling us and giving us addresses.
Now, I also have a question. Is this something we should collaborate with the schools?
Don't they have their own problems with it?
They do, if I may.
Go ahead.
They contact us once in a while to verify who's there. And who's not. If it's a rental, sometimes they tip us off to a rental that we didn't know, although that we're pretty much on top of the majority of them. We have not helped them out. Meaning, we have called with the rental saying, hey, this is a rental that we don't have registered. But they called us for verification. But the school statute is a whole lot different, where they just go knock on the door and see that it's there. We can-
Sergeant Christ, right?
I've gone on those before.
Yeah. Do you have to count toothbrushes?
Mhm.
Count toothbrushes?
I've just been with people that have done that.
Another thing that I'd like to comment about, what happens when you create a rented space. I know there's some code things tossed around. But unless they change, I forget what the percentage is of the house stays as it was built during that. period. And about distribution connection ceilings, that would be wrong. It was always a standard. That standard has changed over the years. If you go into an old house that's got a short basement, although it's above 6'3", it's legal.
If you have bedrooms in the basement, are you not required to have egress
Yes,
windows?
you do have, yes, that's one of the
Or
things
egress
that-
dump?
Absolutely, that's one of the things that is expected. So essentially, when you go into a rental inspection, you're checking for egress, make sure all the windows are working, the building is safe, electrical looks safe, plumbing, open stairways is a no. There is a building code that has changed with handrails, they have to be turned down for those kind of things. But in ceiling heights, if it's as built of that day, we can't have them change it. It's not a disqualifying factor. Now, a basement is a basement. But if it meets the ceiling height of that day for a living space, it's good. There's a lot of restricting things that happen within this. It's very frustrating.
Thank you. Any others? I mean, we could beat this till midnight.
Yeah, when are you getting that bus together to go down to the lobby?
Yeah.
We could piggyback,
it's obvious to actually have this blockchain.
we could piggyback the electric bikes on it too.
That's what I heard, there was a
Can't bring
represented a
electric bikes.
large rental corporation.
Absolutely. You probably know the name.
I would say though, just for future conversation of all of you, this question of what direction you want the renter ordinance to go to for the registrations.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's been discussion about what's going on in Carmel, Fishers and Greenwood. I think that obviously in conjunction with the zoning code, that's be a good time in amending that and making the changes across the board and bringing it up to state code, but if that is something, and, you know, obviously Dave highlighted that early on in this conversation about what that entails, then there are potential future lawsuits. As I indicated, no one is has that in effect yet, as far as I know. It's effective January 1, so whether or not it's to be determined, that's a determination by you in holding off on putting that into the code. I would look for some direction though, if that's going to be something in this amendment process of everything together that we're going to be.
Could we always put it in and pull it out, or is it easier just to keep it out and put it in after we find out what's gonna go on with Greenwood and?
I think that's the better. route.
Okay.
They're hesitant, otherwise if it's in there, that it needs to be enforced. And then that whole process would come into play, and then that counts in subdivisions. And one of the things we were doing last week was looking at subdivisions, because there are many, many lots in town that are still needs and bounds. In not platted subdivision, but, as we determined, they're less, residential that way, there's more commercial that way. We're happy to some degree to find, but there are still some pockets here and there of, you know, of 3 or 4 houses or 10 houses or whatever, that are not platted. So that we'd have to make some parameters for those things, but the idea would be is if that is a consideration, then we clearly want to direct that in. If not, it's a thought of waiting on it, then we just need some direction.
Do you have to put the criteria of subdivisions, or can it be townwide, or does that mean get?
I think you could, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, what the others have done, the kind of the leading towns right now is that they have all their, with some nuances, they're almost, I don't want to say mirror or ordinances.
So they're
pretty
using
close.
subdivisions
They're
to
using
protect their behinds.
And it's a lesser number that way.
Okay.
Believe it or not. I mean, if
Okay.
you look at, you know, town-wide, if you're looking at how many homes are in the town, compared to, you know, they're all doing this 10%. So I think we were calculating, what was the number we had, 8,000,
So we-
something like
I
that.
think the numbers we were looking at was if there are 97 housing or 97 dwelling units in the town of Munster. 900
9,700.
9,700, yeah. That would be 970 rental units that are permitted. Currently, what we have on record for applications for submitted rentals is a little over 1,400. Now, that does not mean that some of these have been sold and now are owner occupied. That has not been done.
Or that they're currently being rented,
Or they're
right?
currently
Just
being
they're registered.
Now, is this condos as well?
The way
Okay,
it's units, dwelling units, whether it's a condo, an apartment, whether it's just a dwelling unit.
okay.
So,
Basically,
So we got a lot
home
of
could be a
apartments.
duplex.
So
Yeah.
could we break it down into single family homes?
that would take some,
Yeah, don't worry about it.
no, I was gonna say that's probably another task
Yeah,
that is recommended come through a third party to
Yeah.
determine your housing stock, percentage on that.
because apartments we go.
Correct.
Cole, when are we gonna see those drafts?
We had, our discussion last week, was we're hoping to get some stuff out to you this week. Obviously, there's, like I said, some of those that are kind of some red lines, you know, areas that are, up for future discussion. So it's gonna be, you know, some of those meetings and discussion on those and moving forward with those, but there's still some areas that we're going through. So our work is going to continue, but we're hoping by next week, or I should say end of next week, we've been able to meet this week, to be able to get, the building or there's still some sections I know that Bob and Sergeant Chuck that work on subdivision control ordinance. So there's different things there that are still going to be forthcoming, but that we should be able to do 5 or 6 of the divisions out to
I think that's the start. We'll take a look at what you come back at us with.
I think what we've accomplished so far is a lot of the policy that deal with case law and with pitfalls. A lot of the other stuff would be more of the, and I think some of us have already seen this, is like defining the building design standards. Those are less burdensome on the legal aspect. But I think what we're really working on is how does this apply to the state code? Will we find ourselves in some type of pitfall if we move forward with these types of policies and recommendations?
But I guess we better than it would, obviously, basically with this conversation, especially those uses, some of those proposals. And some of these are right, some things that are still how we handle one is affecting some others, so there's several that are still kind of, obviously some works in progress in that sense, but at least to be able to get, information to start getting more feedback.
Well, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. Do we have to sign anything?
No, for this, no.
Well, I found this very informative.
Ship sail one.
Did you write the papers available?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
get up some of the rentals, maybe some time now, we're doing the biggest. Really, you should.
Monster, I always have
We need to advance.
Not the question.
That's right. Give me everybody.
It costs you more to process.
They're living there.
But you have to do
And you can now say, you're doing this, there's no form, or you didn't have it on the form.
That's where
Yeah. Problem later on. Needs to-
That was a different story.
I go back, I pulled the one. Now we don't.